15-year-old Jonah got yanked out of the 10th floor at night. Mark Williams was crushed under 60 tons of concrete. Park, a department store worker, got hit on the head in her workplace and then came around in a dark and cramped space. All of these people are connected by the top 3 grand-scale building collapses that made history, which I'll tell you about in this video. Viewer discretion is advised. It's June 24th, 2021. We're in Surfside, a Miami suburb. It's 1:22 a.m. Nicholas Balboa was walking his dog on the beach when suddenly he heard a thunder-like sound. But the weather was nice, and the man realized something terrible had happened. He became one of the first people to witness the grand-scale tragedy. As it turned out, a multi-story residential building collapsed on the waterfront. At least half of the 136 condo apartments whose tenants had been sleeping peacefully got ruined instantly in just 12 seconds. In the pitch-black darkness and eerie silence, Balboa suddenly heard a child's voice coming from the rubble. Still in his beach slippers and with bare hands, the man pushed through tons of glass and fixtures. Finally, he saw a hand waving in the wreck. It was 15-year-old Jonah Handler, who lived on the condo's 10th floor with his mother, Stacy. After the building got ruined, the boy got stuck in the tiny space between 2 damaged walls. He was begging to be saved and for his mom to be found. But Balboa couldn't help the boy alone. Furthermore, when rescuers arrived at the ruined condominium, it became clear the entire country's efforts wouldn't be enough to deal with the aftermath of this tragedy. An emergency was declared in the entire state, and over 80 rescue squads arrived at the site. On the first day, there was news of 35 rescued, 3 hospitalized, 1 dead, and 159 missing. Jonah was one of the people who were hospitalized. Balboa led the rescuers to him and helped them until the boy was freed from under the debris. The day after the collapse, the horrifying news appeared. A fire had started in the rubble and the death toll increased to 5. However, the injured Jonah still didn't know where his mother was. In addition, there were 2 other condominiums in the housing complex. While the reason for the collapse was still unclear, the inhabitants were urged to evacuate to prevent the catastrophe from repeating. Meanwhile, the news about its aftermath was becoming increasingly harrowing. 6 days after the collapse, 12 people were confirmed dead, and 149 others were thought to be missing. By then, young Jonah had already regained consciousness and asked about his mother again, but the doctors only advised him to rest and not worry. Meanwhile, the rescue operation had to be suspended due to the possible collapse of the remaining part of the building, since Tropical Storm Elsa was approaching Florida. Eventually, the dangerous wall had been demolished by July 4th, and the search effort resumed. It brought nothing but bad news, though. The death toll rose to 46 people, and the odds of anyone surviving were close to 0. In the meanwhile, doctors were helping Jonah, who survived but had 12 fractured vertebrae and torn back muscles. The boy's father didn't allow journalists to see his son and kept the aftermath of the tragedy secret from him. Everyone who'd been watching the news, on the other hand, already knew that Jonah's mom survived after the building collapse, but died in the hospital. By July 23rd, the final death toll was announced. It was 98 people. Their families demanded answers to the question of how such a tragedy could have happened. The answer turned out to be even scarier than anyone could have expected. Information about critical damage to the condominium was available years before the collapse. The southern tower was the first of 3 to be built in this apartment complex. All 3 towers had construction guideline violations. Specialists found out that the building's support beams, located at the level of the underground parking lot, had less metal reinforcement than necessary. The engineers had made a fatal mistake during the construction of the swimming pool right above the parking lot. The waterproofing layer didn't have the necessary tilt, causing rainwater to gather there instead of escaping into the drain. As a result, it kept gradually gnawing at the concrete slab below the pool, and then at the metal reinforcement rods in the support beams. The company that owned the building was informed of this after an inspection as far back as 2018. Moreover, a year before the catastrophe, a video of giant cracks in the condo's parking lot appeared online. After that, a multi-million renovation of the building was reportedly announced, but it never started. And even that's not all. 36 hours before the collapse, a local newspaper published photos taken in the southern tower's pool maintenance rooms. In the pictures, you can clearly see water puddles, cracks in the concrete and corroded metal fixtures. But no one reacted to this information. Just 7 minutes before the building got tragically ruined, a video showing a strong water current flooding the condo's garage and its floor specked with pieces of concrete appeared on the news. So, after examining all of these clues, the experts converged on the thought that one of the columns under the pool's floor had crumbled and the concrete slab over the parking lot had collapsed. After this, the remaining parts of the building fell into the crater. So it looks like young Jonah Handler suffered because of the construction company's negligence and the building owner's carelessness. In addition to physical injuries, the boy sustained serious psychological trauma analogous to post-traumatic stress disorder Army officers experience. He still shivers at the sound of thunder and is in a constant battle with survivor's guilt. I don't think Jonah knew that when his condo's southern tower had just been built, a similar tragedy happened on the other side of the country. July 17, 1981, Kansas City. The luxurious Hyatt Hotel at Crown Center had been hosting grand dancing parties for over a year. That evening, over 1,600 people gathered there. Dozens of visitors were staying on the elevated skywalks on the level of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors, from which they can enjoy a stunning view of the atrium. 34-year-old Mark Williams had just approached the bar when he heard a loud bang. In the next moment, the 4th floor skywalk with around 20 people detached and fell onto the 2nd floor walkway, with 40 visitors still on it. Just a few seconds later, 58,000 kilograms of steel and concrete hit the crowded hotel lobby. An eerie silence filled the room for a moment, followed by the first screams. An unknown number of people ended up under the rubble. Mark Williams was one of them. The man realized both of his legs were broken as he saw them near his ears. He also suspected he'd sustained a spine fracture, but wasn't feeling any pain due to a massive adrenaline spike. However, Mark's situation suddenly deteriorated drastically when a flood broke out in the debris. The collapse had damaged high-pressure pipes, and water started pouring out of it at an incredible speed. Williams, whose face was pressed to the floor by a piece of debris, started choking. He wasn't likely to know that there were bare electric cables all around him, so he could be electrocuted at any moment. The rescuers and the medics who arrived at the scene were shocked by the scale of the tragedy. They assisted almost 200 people, and that's only those who hadn't been crushed under the rubble. Although over 100 rescuers and volunteers showed up at the site in less than 50 minutes, they couldn't get the victims from under the debris. The concrete slabs turned out to be so enormous that they were impossible to get out of the way with the available means. A powerful crane arrived late at night, and the first large lump of concrete was successfully lifted at 3 a.m., but tons of debris remained to be removed. Under one of them, the rescuers found Mark Williams, who was miraculously alive 9 hours after the collapse. Suddenly, the man heard the noise of machines over him and started yelling frantically. The rescuers stopped for a second and yelled back. However, when the specialists began working on getting Williams out of the trap, the jackhammer chisels went centimeters from his body, threatening to kill the man. When Mark was already preparing for the next metal chisel to drill his back, the concrete skywalk over him got lifted, and 9.5 hours after the tragedy, he was finally taken out from under the rubble. Williams became the last survivor. On the morning of July 18th, the bodies of 31 people were found under another skywalk segment. Some corpses were unrecognizable. Yet after the 14-hour-long rescue operation was over, 216 people were found to be injured, and 114 were pronounced dead. The death toll could still rise, as the doctors believed Mark Williams would be unable to survive his injuries. But what caused this large-scale tragedy? 3 suspended walkways, each around 37 meters long, were built in the Hyatt's lobby. The 3rd floor skywalk was placed somewhat to the side, and the 2nd and 4th floor skywalks were right under each other. Each walkway was planned to be attached to the ceiling with metal rods. During the construction, though, a different decision was made. Just as planned, the 4th floor walkway was attached to the ceiling, and the 2nd floor walkway was attached to the lower part of the skywalk above. At the same time, the engineers didn't change anything in the original project. That means the rods designed to sustain only one skywalk were now holding 2. Moreover, when a collapse occurred during construction, it was ignored. After the work was done, there was most likely an understanding with the quality assessment inspectors to open the hotel as soon as possible. All of this led to the disaster in less than a year. Its consequences forever changed the lives of those who survived this horror.
You ever seen that?
No.
That's you.
Wow.
The doctor's predictions didn't come true, and Mark Williams also ended up among the survivors. Moreover, the man was told he'd never be able to walk again. However, fast forward 32 years, and the man confidently rises to meet the rescuers who freed him from the trap. Williams didn't doubt for a second that he'd survive and regain his health. He also claims this trial made him a better person. In my opinion, this man's story is scary, but also absolutely incredible. However, I'm sure that 19-year-old Park Seung-hyun had never heard about it. That's because the girl lived on the opposite side of the Pacific Ocean, in the capital of South Korea. In the summer of 1995, she was working at one of the city's most popular shopping malls, Sampoon. Yet on June 29th, a tragedy cut short the girl's monotonous work in the children's goods department. It all started with a small inconvenience. From early morning, the area's air conditioning didn't work. In the evening, it became known that the shopping mall's 5th floor, where all the restaurants were, was closed to visitors. The Sampoon staff knew that their air conditioning system was malfunctioning and the roof needed repairs. Yet when rumors about the 4th floor being closed started spreading, Park and her colleagues became suspicious. Their higher-ups didn't say anything though, and the employees went on helping the customers, whose numbers exceeded 2,000 on that day. At around 5:40 p.m., Park, who worked on the 1st floor, heard a powerful bang from above. Another one followed, and then the alarm went off in the room. The people started panicking and scurrying around. Something fell on the girl's head, and she went unconscious. The following moment, all 5 floors of the mall's southern wing collapsed, burying around 1,500 people. Park Seung-hyun was one of them. She regained consciousness in total darkness. At first, the girl was still able to move, but then a piece of debris above her moved down and crushed her to the floor. The rescuers arrived within minutes and realized right away that South Korea's deadliest peacetime disaster had happened. On the very next day, it was known that 530 people were injured, 30 were dead, and the number of those missing were measured in hundreds. It was crucial to dig them out from under the rubble as fast as possible, but the rescuers came up against a lot of issues. It soon became clear that almost all of their technology and equipment was ineffective. The giant cranes could easily kill the survivors. Sound detectors and service dogs couldn't track anything in the chaos of the ruins. Heat detectors often reacted to fires that had started deep inside the debris and posed another problem both for the rescuers and for those still alive. By the evening, the news became truly shocking. The number of the injured rose to 910, and the death toll hit 113. The shocked Park Seung-hyun was still calling for help, remaining stuck in a deadly trap. However, even though human voices were still heard from under the rubble, less than 2 days after the tragedy, the Seoul mayor commanded that the search be stopped. The risk of the remaining wall collapsing and the poisonous smoke from the fires endangered hundreds of rescuers' lives. Yet the victims' families walked out to protest immediately, and the search was resumed. This saved the lives of 24 people who managed to survive in the basement and hold out for 52 hours. At first, though, the rescuers only managed to push a wide pipe to the victims' shelter to ensure their access to fresh air, food, and water. It took another 13 hours to clear the way to the survivors and get them out. However, no one had reached Park Seung-hyun, yet the search and rescue operation continued, but only dead bodies were found in the debris. Until the first miracle happened 10 days after the collapse. A young man was rescued from the rubble. As it turned out, that whole time he'd been drinking the water pouring out of the fire hoses and kept playing with the children's toy to stay sane. But this wasn't the only miracle. 2 days later, an 18-year-old girl was rescued. After this, no one hoped to find any survivors in the debris. But suddenly, on July 16th, one of the rescuers heard something strange under a concrete slab. He stopped the equipment, yelled, and heard a woman's voice answer. Having made a big enough hole in the debris, the firefighter saw Park Seung-hyun. It was an absolute miracle since the woman practically had no scratch on her body. She didn't remember drinking the water that seeped through the rubble, but she couldn't have survived otherwise. Yet the very thing that saved these 3 lucky people took away the lives of others. As it turned out, many people had survived the collapse but choked on the water from the fire hoses. After the rubble was cleared, the entire nation went into mourning. The collapse of Sampoon had killed 502 people. It was a catastrophe on an unprecedented scale, but it could have been avoided if the mall owners hadn't put profit over human lives. The news was shocking. The management knew the destruction of the building was unavoidable since the very morning of that fateful day. Giant cracks appeared in the building's roof, some up to 10 centimeters wide. Then the management closed down the 5th floor and called engineers to assess the risks. The specialists said the building was going to collapse. At 3 p.m., a Sampoon management meeting was held. It ruled to close down the 4th floor but keep the mall open to avoid losing the day's revenue. Yet most higher-ups and managers were promptly evacuated. What exactly led to the catastrophe, though? The start of Sampoon construction coincided with late 80s, when Korea was getting rebuilt after the war at lightning speed. This often caused the building's quality to suffer. At first, Sampoon was supposed to be a 4-story apartment complex, but its owner suddenly decided it was going to be a shopping mall, and a 5-story one at that. According to all rules of engineering and physics, this called for a total change in the entire construction. Yet, that never happened. Moreover, instead of adding or reinforcing the support beams so they could support the additional 5th floor, their quantity was decreased to accommodate the escalators. The building also didn't have a steel carcass, or at least beams. Each new flooring was simply put on concrete columns along the perimeter. Such a building could not physically hold even for 10 years. Eventually, a food court was built on the 5th floor, heated with hot water pipes. This put further pressure on the support columns. The last drop was the 3 giant air conditioning units with an overall mass of 45,000 kilograms installed on the roof. Moreover, when the neighbors complained about the noise, the conditioning units were simply moved to the other side of the shopping mall, literally destroying the roof as a result. Cracks started appearing on the roof, and the vibration of the air conditioning kept them widening and spreading through the building. Eventually, the support columns failed under the load and collapsed, setting off a deadly domino effect. Each floor fell on the one below. After the catastrophe, it became clear that the concrete quality in the beams were subpar. The fixtures were critically few, and the beams themselves were thinner than planned. In the end, Lee Jun, the owner of Sampoon Group, was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison, and his son, who was the general director of the shopping mall, to 7 years behind bars. 2 more officials were imprisoned for bribery. However, not even this punishment for the perpetrators can give Park Sung-hyun back her life before the catastrophe. The girl was discharged from the hospital after 3 weeks with her physical health fully intact, but psychologically, she will never be the same. Do you know what infuriates me the most? If between the project stage of the building and its completion, every specialist had done their job as they should have, none of these tragedies would have happened. But they did happen, and sadly, they're not the only ones. So, if you want to find out about other large-scale building collapses, let me know in the comments.